A diversity boost for the US Congress, as well as the election of Donald Trump. Women from various ethnic backgrounds were also voted in. So what does it mean for democracy in the US? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Martine Dennis. Tuesday's election result in the United States was a surprise for many, but it wasn't just a triumphant night for Donald Trump. Another record was set. The new-look Congress will be the most diverse in history. For the first time, 4 women of colour will become senators. Well, 4 may be a small number when you consider there are 100 seats in the Senate, but it is a significant increase. Let's take a look at the women who've made the largest leap in any one US election. There's Attorney General Kamala Harris. She'll be the first Indian American in the Senate and the first black female senator of California. Catherine Cortez Masto also broke barriers by becoming the first Latina senator after winning in Nevada. Tammy Duckworth will move from the House of Representatives to the Senate to become the first Thai American. They're joining Senator Mazie Hirono, a Japanese American who's the first female senator from Hawaii and the first female Asian American senator. All right, let's get the thoughts of our guests now. We can talk to Andra Gillespie, who's in Atlanta. She's Associate Professor in the Department of Political Science at Emory College. From Brussels, we have Michelle Chang, a professor in the European Political and Administrative Studies at the College of Europe. And here in Doha, we have Clyde Wilcox, professor in the Government Department at Georgetown University, Qatar. Welcome to you all. Andra in Atlanta, can I start with you? This is a ray of light then that pretty much went under the radar. So many people were so exercised or delirious at the election for the president. Many people didn't even realise that these congressional elections had gone this way.
Yes, this is a really important step forward in terms of diversifying the House and the Senate, not just in terms of racial diversity, but also in terms of gender diversity. It wasn't just in the Senate. There were also 3 new congresswomen of color who were elected in the House. And this is a remarkable step forward. Now, to be sure, and to put it into context, these women are Democrats, and they are in a minority party that is going to be working alongside a president from the opposite party. They won't realize their power initially, but if they stay in Congress for a long period of time, these women could easily become players.
And coming to you, Michelle, in Brussels, presumably these women are Democrats, therefore they have socially liberal agendas. How would they have succeeded electorally at a time when it seems as though the nation was voting in somebody who has scant regard for these particular issues, and they has quite a very little respect, if you like, for women and for minorities? How could that have happened?
I think that this points to the diverse reasons why people voted for Donald Trump. On the one hand, he had said things that were racist and misogynist and very upsetting to a large portion of the electorate. On the other hand, he also, more than Hillary Clinton, stood for change and some sort of radical change at that. And I think that was what was really driving his vote for many voters who are not misogynist and not racist.
And Clyde, so there seem to be 2 very distinct waves of voting behaviour in the United States, one on the local and another on the national level.
Well, it's also worth noting that Hillary Clinton carried the 3 states where the new women of color are coming from. But yeah, basically Americans often split their ballots between the president and Senate or House or local offices.
Okay, and Andra, I'm just wondering whether these women will fare very well in the current congressional climate. It is overwhelmingly male, it is overwhelmingly white. How much chance do they have of making a mark?
Well, when they come in, they have very low seniority, so they're not necessarily going to get their pick of committee assignments, and Democrats are not going to have as many committee assignments as Republicans will have. Their strength will lie in their longevity, and because they are from Democratic leaning states are overwhelmingly Democratic states. And in the case of California, there's a good chance that they will be able to serve in their positions for long periods of time. Particularly Kamala Harris. The woman that she replaced, Barbara Boxer, was a long-serving U.S. Senator. Catherine Cortez Masto was replacing the Senate Minority Leader. So they have a good chance of being able to get reelected if they perform well in their seats. And as they gain seniority, then they are able to gain power and influence. And
Kamala Harris has even been mentioned as a potential first black female president.
Yes, I mean, you know, it's I think too early to make those kinds of prognostications. However, she's been somebody who's been on the radar for a long period of time. She has, you know, this experience as Attorney General. She was co-chair of the 2012 Democratic National Convention. She's been a key player for a long period of time, and she has the type of charisma that Barack Obama had, which is why I think she's getting this attention right now.
And Michelle, as an Asian American, watching these developments from afar, you're in Brussels, in the Belgian capital. How's it look to you? How's the whole campaigning period appeared to you?
It actually echoed some of the earlier campaigning that we'd seen in Europe over the Brexit vote. In particular, the nastiness of the campaign. It has been particularly, they've been very direct, the Trump campaign, in terms of its racism and misogyny. And that is something that we have been very shocked by in Europe, but we've also seen it rising in Europe as well, in countries like France with the rise of the National Front, for example, and in the UK after the Brexit vote, we also saw reports in the rise of more overt racism happening in the United Kingdom after the Brexit vote had gone through, and concerns that something similar will happen in the United States.
And Clyde, so what kind of political and social climate has been created by the Trump campaign?
Well, it's a very polarized America right now. You're seeing the demonstrations, which we'll talk about soon, but there's also a wave of hate crimes going on. One of my friend's son goes to a school where they've spray painted swastikas. There's emails going around in some colleges about lynchings. So there's a lot of tension in America at this moment.
And do you think that this is something that can be sustained? Because the anger that we're seeing on the streets, we've seen for more than 3 nights now. I understand that some are even planning to maintain this level on the streets until January the 20th, which of course is Inauguration Day.
You know, it's hard to sustain that kind of energy and to get out in the street day after day after day. But there's a lot of fear in these people, a lot of fear for the community. So I think that it's possible that they could continue to be out there, yeah.
Okay, Andrea, so we're looking now at a Trump presidency, aren't we? I'm just wondering how the nature of politics you feel might have changed, how it might have been battered, if you like, by the level of discourse, the level of debate, the vulgarity in many instances that was raised on the national platform.
Well, I think people's levels of trust have plummeted as a result of this election. There are definitely those who are ecstatic about the election of Donald Trump who did not trust Hillary Clinton, and they would have been, you know, in tatters and probably would have been inconsolable this week had Hillary Clinton won. I think for a lot of people who are taking to the streets now, it really reflects their deep levels of fear and deep levels of mistrust. Gallup reported that 42% of Americans were afraid of a Trump presidency, and I think that's motivating people to go out to the streets. There are people who heard what Donald Trump said on the campaign stump, and they're afraid that he's going to try to implement that. And fundamentally, they aren't sure that American institutions are going to be able to put a check on the passions that were ignited during this campaign that were beneath the surface the whole time, that I think a lot of people thought really didn't exist anymore. And I think they're worried that a Republican-controlled Congress is also not going to put a check on Donald Trump's ability to be able to implement some of the things that he promised while he was running for office, like the deportation force or the ban on Muslim immigrants to the United States and other kinds of things. Right now, the protests will continue continue in some form. They will probably abate around the holidays, but they will continue in some form until they're either repressed or until Donald Trump makes some concessions and acknowledges the ways that his campaign really did incite some of these fears. And I think he's going to have to talk to his supporters and let them know that the types of behavior that we've seen, the hate crimes that have been reported in the last few days, that this is not acceptable and that he doesn't stand with that. And that may be a difficult thing for him to do, and it also might be a difficult thing for those who oppose him to take seriously. So he's got a lot of bridge building to do between now and the end of his term.
And Clyde, because this is the mark of a leader, isn't it? Because he has got to be a leader of all 200 million plus people of the United States, not just those who, person by person, was actually a minority, we understand, Hillary Clinton having won the popular vote. He's got to reach out to all of them. He does seem capable, it would appear in these early days, of being able to compromise.
So far, we've seen him backing away from quite a few of his campaign promises very, very quickly. He gave sort of a gracious statement about Hillary Clinton. He didn't talk about throwing her in prison anymore. But we've seen him have bursts of civility during the campaign that immediately dissipates whenever he's criticized. And so I do worry that he lacks the character, the stability to be able to pull it off. But we hope he can, because if he does, this would be the time for him. The Klan is ready to march to North Carolina. You say, I don't support this, right? This is not what my campaign's about.
But won't this come down to, I'll put this one to you, Michelle, because the personal failings or otherwise of Donald Trump surely will be brought into check by those around him. I mean, there is a political machine, isn't there, for any administration that surely will be able to give him at least the semblance of statesmanship.
We would hope so. And as was already mentioned, there are indications that Trump, as a president-elect and hopefully as president, is willing to be less combative, less controversial, and more presidential and statesman-like than he had been during the campaign. During the campaign, he was trying to appeal to a specific electorate as well and incite and inflame the passions. He was very good at doing that, but there are not strong indications that he feels very strongly from an ideological perspective either. And so perhaps the pragmatist within Donald Trump will be willing to make deals and to compromise more so than his campaign rhetoric would indicate.
So Clyde, so we're not struggling here with a trenchant ideology, are we? Tell us a bit more about your theory on identity politics and how that is on the rise in the United States. Is perhaps identity replacing party affiliation?
No, I wouldn't say that, but I think that this particular campaign between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump was very much an identity politics campaign. So Donald Trump is appealing to white, rural, high school educated voters, speaking to them very directly. Hillary Clinton speaking to a coalition of minorities. In contrast to, say, Bernie Sanders, who was making the pitch that we all are better off if we break up the banks and the economy rises.
And so you're saying that party affiliation will remain, but Bernie Sanders, for instance, wasn't a Democrat. It's doubtful whether Donald Trump is actually a Republican.
Yeah, so I think moving forward, one of the things that's going to be interesting, the Republicans in Congress don't really like or trust Donald Trump. So the worry that they won't stop him, it's more like, you know, they might be at war very quickly. We don't know that yet. I mean, thinking of the new women in the Senate, as long as the filibuster remains, there'll be some kind of check on what he would try to do.
And Andra, how does the African American community, not as if it's a homogenous, amorphous mass, but where does African American politics fit into this, having gone through this overwhelmingly voting for Hillary Clinton and probably feeling rather snubbed, if not offended, by the presidential campaign?
Well, I mean, there are a number of things to keep in mind. To go back to Clyde's question, one of the issues is how strong parties are. And political scientists have talked for years about how parties are relatively weaker compared to where they were a generation or two ago. And that helps to foment the rise of identity politics, but also the rise of personality-driven campaigns, as we have seen in this election cycle. As it relates to African American voters, one of the things that's actually really interesting about this vote is that Donald Trump actually got a larger percentage of the African American vote than Mitt Romney did. He beat him by 1 percentage point among African Americans. And then on top of that, there was an additional small subset of African American voters who chose to vote third party. And so what that ended up translating to is Hillary Clinton getting roughly the same proportion of African American votes as John Kerry got in 2004. So in that respect, she underperformed, in addition to the fact that blacks turned out at lower rates in this election cycle than they did in 2008 and in 2012. That suggests that there was a certain malaise amongst voters that was not just with African Americans, but that was endemic across the board, and that she suffered tremendously for it and lost the election as a result of it. If we look at where the margins are in some of the key battleground states, those margins were actually very, very narrow. And while you shouldn't put everything on African American voters, it's not inconceivable that Hillary Clinton couldn't have closed the gap in Michigan and in Wisconsin and in Pennsylvania by finding a few 10,000 more votes. So about 12,000 in Michigan, about 27,000 the last I checked in Wisconsin, and about 50,000 in Pennsylvania. So, people are definitely Monday morning quarterbacking, as we would say in the United States right now, wondering where they could have gotten those extra votes from.
And Michelle, just looking at the European experience, because we've got important primary elections in France coming up quite soon. Marine Le Pen, head of the National Front, obviously hoping that what we've seen in the United States will translate into wins in her sails as well as she enters into the electoral cycle there.
Yes, that's right. And it is definitely a possibility that she's going to be able to ride the anti-establishment wave that has been dominating the news and the electoral cycles recently in the UK, as already mentioned, and now in the United States. Moreover, the splits within the leading parties in France would also help Marine Le Pen in the end emerge as the winner if they are unable to go and coalesce around a single candidate and gain enough broad-based support.
So, Clyde, it seems very much as though what we're highlighting, certainly in America, particularly as well in the UK when it came to the referendum on leaving the EU and perhaps other parts of Europe, is a failing, if you like, on the part of the liberal elite to identify the needs, the requirements of this maybe less vocal majority or large minority of their various constituencies.
You know, I'm from West Virginia, and there are rural areas and small towns in West Virginia. The jobs have been gone for 20 years. No one was talking to them in this election. Hillary Clinton was not out there talking about ways to bring the jobs back. And so when Donald Trump says, I'm going to make America great again, they maybe don't necessarily believe it, but they have to hope, and at least he's talking to them. So I do think that there was a real failure on the part of Democrats. I don't mean to blame this on Hillary Clinton, but I think there's been a failure on the Democratic establishment to keep that working class message throughout the country.
And Michelle, was that a failing that was identified, particularly in the British referendum, the Brexit vote? Was that because, again, the Westminster bubble, the parliamentary cosy circle, if you like, ignored what were the daily struggles of so many people in the country?
Absolutely. There was a general complacency that was identified among the governing elite, and there was an assumption that people were going to ultimately vote with their economic interests, which seemed to be remaining in the European Union. That's not what we saw. We saw some regions that were heavily funded and supported by EU money still vote in favor of Brexit, with the vague government promises that they would make up for what the EU was going to go and give them in terms of regional development funds, which the government quickly backtracked on. But this idea of those that were left behind from globalization, from Europeanization, that don't see anything changing for their circumstances, then a radical break like Brexit, like what Donald Trump had said, what do you have to lose? This starts to look more and more appealing.
And Andra, let's go back to the slightly more personal side of all of this, if you like, because we've heard so many very, very emotional accounts from political commentators, some of whom have almost been in tears on air when they've described how they're going to have to explain what's happened in US politics to their kids. You teach your kids that cheating is not a good thing, cheats don't prosper, it's not a great thing to lie, you need to stick to the truth, you need to be honourable. And yet all of that moral architecture, if you like, has been assaulted, hasn't it?
Well, I think a lot of people really wanted to operate under the mantra that nice people finished first. And Donald Trump didn't present himself necessarily as a nice person in terms of how bare-knuckled this campaign was. I know that there are his supporters who think that he's very nice, and there's stories that he's gracious, in person. But I think people look at how he's conducted his campaign, and they wanted to argue that somebody who could make the types of highly racialized and sexist statements that he could would be repudiated by the American public. And that's a really tough thing to try to convey to children, that there were people who were attracted to Donald Trump despite the fact that he said things about racial groups and religious groups and women that we would not consider to be acceptable. Sadly, this is a wake-up call that I think a lot of people have to realize. One, not everybody agrees. People view things very differently from one another. And that often it's important for people to be a part of the process. So there are a lot of people who are upset about the results of the election, and they may not have voted in the election. And so hopefully they understand from this that every vote counts. We'll see where America is 4 years from now as a result of the Trump presidency. And we'll see whether or not our institutions are resilient as a result of it, so that we know and we can be rest assured that even if the person that you voted for didn't get elected to office, that the fundamental parts of the American Constitution and the fundamental parts of American government still stand despite who is elected president.
And Michelle, I'm just wondering whether this rather negative campaign that's been waged, whether there could be some unintended but positive consequences insofar as civil society could be propelled upon itself more and persuaded to organise better and perhaps be more galvanised as a consequence of perhaps feeling that Washington doesn't have much sympathy for them.
This is a possibility, and I've seen a lot of efforts being made online for people to go and mobilize and to educate and inform how you can make a difference. And the message being that the election, the presidential election of 2016 might have been lost, but there's going to be the midterm elections in 2 years. There'll be another presidential election. This isn't over by any long shot. And also a potential benefit of the gloves are off type of politics that we had in the election campaign. A potential benefit, if you want to call it that, is a lot of the issues have been laid very starkly on the table. And perhaps this could be an opening for more dialogue and more information sharing between different groups that have become quite marginalized. And we've heard about groups existing within their own bubbles, their own ethnic bubble or socioeconomic bubble or political bubble, that this will also perhaps promote some more efforts to go and understand the other side's perspectives.
And Clyde, do you think that we've entered a nasty period in the United States generally?
Well, it's been a very nasty campaign, but it's been nasty for the last 12 years. I mean, Obama's election brought out a really nasty side of racism in America. We can only hope, though, that as a result of this, that the country backs away from the nastiness. Trump could set a different tone. I mean, that would be his responsibility. We don't know whether he's capable of doing it. And in the meantime, we have 2 elections coming up, and the Republicans are entirely responsible for government. The economy's at a pretty high point. It's bound to drop down a little bit, so it would be a pretty good time for the Democrats to counter-organize and take back government.
And what about the possibility of there being, of this stimulating much more organisation, much more practical organisation on the part of civil society? Briefly, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I think that's a really good thought. The key, though, is to get outside the bubble in the organizing, right? We can organize within ourselves with our little email lists and our online stuff, but we need to be able to organize into these communities where people feel disenfranchised, but they're not quite the same as us.
Clyde Wilcox, Andra Gillespie and Michelle Chang. Thank you all very much indeed. Thanks. And as ever, thank you for watching. You can see the programme again anytime you like by going to the website, aljazeera.com. For more discussion, should you want it, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can join the conversation on Twitter, our handle @AJ Inside Story. From me, Martine Dennis, and the whole team here in Doha, it's bye for now.